Coming up on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show.
Within OCF, we say there are 3 pillars to what we're doing, and we need to have 3-pillar alignment before we can say we're done. So the first pillar is the specification. Second pillar is the certification. So you certify against the spec. And then the third pillar is the open source implementation. And if anything is going to be mandatory in certification, it has to be in the spec. But you also have to have open source code available.
By definition, an ecosystem brings together multiple products in order to deliver an outcome. However, today's IoT standards don't go far enough to enable different products to work together. Another layer is needed to ensure that the ecosystem products speak the same language. In this episode of the IoT Business Show, I speak with Dave McCall about the Open Connectivity Foundation and the codebase they provide to enable smart home products from different vendors to talk to each other. Exactly what you need for any ecosystem.
All this and more on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show. The people, the business, and the technology of the next generation internet. This is the IoT Inc. Business Show. And now, here's your host, Bruce Sinclair.
Hello and welcome to the IoT Inc. Business Show. This show is for business leaders and managers employing the Internet of Things for their business or the business of their customers. I'm your host, Bruce Sinclair, and I interview the industry's leading authorities to find out how they use IoT to improve business and create value. If you like this show, subscribe to it on iTunes and go to iotinc.com to check out my complimentary articles, videos, meetups, and webinars. First, a little housekeeping. This is the second episode of 3 on IoT consortia, alliances, and foundations. 99 episodes ago, I thought there were 5 main IoT ecosystems that could be right for you. Now I have it down to 3, and I interview them all. The first one was the Industrial Internet Consortium, or the IIC. This one, the Open Connectivity Foundation, or the OCF. And next is the Platform Industry 4.0. This episode is made possible by the IoT Inc. Certified IoT Professional, or ICIP, or ISIP, online training and certification program. Become a certified IoT professional by taking the program's 3 courses: ICIP Technology, ICIP Business, and ICIP Strategy and Digital Transformation. Details of which can be found at www.iot-inc.com/training. This week's ICIP graduate shout-out is to Eric Seneath. If you're looking for an IoT boss for your organization, you can get to Eric's LinkedIn profile on our homepage. And if you're hiring and would like to get an early look at our graduates, let me know. I'm already doing this informally with 3 companies and will soon formalize the process. With me today on the IoT show is David McCall. David is a senior strategic planner at Intel. He was involved in establishing the Open Connectivity Foundation and currently chairs their strategy working group. He has 18 years of experience in wireless technologies and most recently has been focused on communication software and the Internet of Things. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
So I'm curious, how much of your day, or your week, your month is spent on Intel versus the OCF?
Right now, I'd say it's probably about 30% of my time is on OCF, and then the rest is working in the connected home division at Intel, which works on telco and cable gateways. So still in a related area, but that's kind of my day job, I guess. Mm-hmm. And then my side gig is OCF, but it's a pretty substantial side gig.
Now, what percentage of time, for members, and I'm kind of jumping ahead though, but is that a good metric for, because one of the things when everyone's listening to us right now, they're going to be wondering, okay, should I join OCF? And really what they're going to be thinking is, what's the ROI on joining? And then they're going to have to think what the cost is, and they're going to think about their time. How much time have you seen necessary to make it worth the investment for a member to actually be spending on the OCF?
Well, that really varies a lot on depending on what you want to do in the organization. If you're just consuming what the organization is putting out, really not very much time at all. You can just go to the websites, read the specs, get the open source code, and implement it in your products, and just maybe turn up occasionally at the some of the plug fest to make sure that your product is interoperating with everybody else's. But if you want to actually push the organization in a certain direction, if you want new features implemented, then you would need to spend some time participating in the groups, and that varies a lot as well. I mean, some people would just spend a couple of hours a week maybe, and we have some of the larger companies who are put a lot of weight into the organization, who have teams of people, some of whom spend all of their time working on OCF.
No, and I thought actually that's what your answer was going to be. I thought you were going to say that you're full-time on this. Are you working on any other alliances, consortia, groups, or is this the only one?
This is really the only one at the moment. I have been involved in some others in the past, and in the early days with OCF, I was spending much more of my time on the organization and setting up the organization. But things changed. That was back in 2014, 2015, and now this is just one aspect of my job.
So tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background then, and specifically how it relates to IoT. You did tell us the area that you're working on in Intel, but just give us a bit of history.
Sure. Well, I'm originally from Northern Ireland. I have a master's degree in electronics from the University of Edinburgh. I guess my first experience with the Internet of Things, although it wasn't called that then, could be traced back to the early days of Bluetooth. I was working at CSR, which is one of the more successful Bluetooth startups back then. I came with them to the USA, ended up running the PC business unit there. Left CSR in 2009 and then got involved in a small startup that was developing a software framework for connecting smart devices over any available transport. Then in 2011, Intel acquired that company, which is how I came into Intel. And with the rise of IoT, we started looking at whether we needed a connectivity framework for that. And we decided the answer was yes, we did. And that was the genesis of OCF.
Okay.
So I was part of putting that strategy together. Again, this was back in sort of 2013. The organization itself was formed in 2014, and it's been quite the ride since then.
Oh, now what is, I want you to define for us, what is the connectivity framework?
Well, this is, I guess some people would refer to it as middleware, but it is, the product that I was working on at that software startup was trying to deliver a connectivity between smart devices over any available transport. So an application developer could just talk to this software framework and say, connect me to that device. And then the connection itself could be over Bluetooth. It could be over Wi-Fi or a local network. It could be over cloud. There was even UWB involved at that time. But basically, the app developer wouldn't need to worry about those details. And you could even move connections around between those. So it was providing an abstraction layer so that the developers who weren't really familiar with the guts of the underlying technology didn't need to worry about them. And that was essentially the really high-level idea behind something like OCF. We recognized that the Internet of Things was going to result in a lot of data, a lot of control points being available now. But to be useful, this all had to bubble up to applications, and most of those application developers aren't embedded programmers. They aren't experienced with communications technologies, so they needed some level of abstraction. They also needed some way of dealing with this huge amount of fragmentation that's in the IoT comms. So the idea of having that universal language that you could use to talk to and talk about the Internet of Things was going to be necessary to really deliver on the vision that people had of everything being able to talk to everything else, but also being able to do that securely.
Now, then maybe contrast the differences. I mean, what you're saying to me sounds like a networking stack that has the media protocol, it has the networking protocol, and it has the application protocol. So what's different than using the three standards, the communication standards that we're talking about right now, or that I just mentioned?
Well, I would say that what we're focusing on is the basic interaction model, and then having common data models for all the sorts of devices that you're going to be talking to, and then having a security layer over that, which means that only applications or only users who have the correct access controls can access the resources that are described. So we're sitting, if you want to think of it, above the IP layer. We can also run on IP, but we're sitting above that, and we go up not quite to the highest layer in the OSI stack, but quite far up. The definition get a little bit fuzzy, to be honest, at times. But what you're really dealing with OCF is that resource layer. So a light switch is always represented the same way. A thermostat is always represented the same way, and you can recognize those, find those devices, and access those devices, provided you have the right access controls in place.
Right. Okay, so yeah, I mean, another way maybe of saying this is, and how I think about it, is a meta layer, in the sense of that's almost like the fourth protocol, standard layer, whatever you want to use, where the application protocol is going to be identifying the data, but the data, the metadata. But then with the meta layer, at least in my vocabulary, it then defines a dictionary, so to speak. And the reason I thought of it is that you said when a light bulb is a light bulb, that means all the lights that are going to be using your resource layer, the OCF resource layer, are going to be using the same metadata constructs to describe themselves. So there's that interoperability. Then you wrap some security around that. On top of that, is that maybe a good way of thinking about it?
Yes, I think that's right. And there's that interoperability layer. We deliver that partly by providing bridging into other protocols. But then we also, you could run a device natively as well. So the idea is to provide as much interoperability as possible in the short and medium term, but also offer a path towards some level of consolidation. We also, with the security layer, have designed that so that we can support some of the more complex use cases that we can see coming down the pipe. Okay.
No, and I think that's important. I mean, what I don't like is when you silo things together, and then you're having to use for example, the old school Zigbee or Z-Wave, where they basically have a stack, and I know they've been trying to separate, and I don't even know what they're doing these days, but they tried to separate it to a certain extent, but having one stack that's kind of glued together that you can't separate, you don't have the ability. For example, you might want to use Bluetooth, you might want to use Wi-Fi. That's at that layer. You might want to use hopefully IP, but you're going to be on the OT network, so you're going to have to use different networking protocols. And then on the application layer, you obviously want to have you want to have flexibility, but I think there's a lot of value one level above that, what I'm calling the meta layer, to standardize the metadata that you're going to be using, and that's really important for when you want this interoperability. But I guess I'm hoping your answer is going to be yes when I say there's still that flexibility of the other three layers, right? They can use their data constructs the way they want at the application level layer. They can use different networking protocols, and then obviously they can use different radio protocols.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. We've designed to be provide that interoperability communications regardless of the form factor, operating system, service provider, transport technology, ecosystem, all of that. It's fundamentally, if you're building the applications that are going to be talking to a lot of devices, at some level, you're going to need to bubble everything up to a common language, even if that's just what you internally within your app are going to be using. But this can be a lot of work and to develop that sort of thing. And so across the industry, if everybody is doing that all the time, that's just a huge waste of effort. It's better to get together, do it once, do it right, have those security things in place, which are going to allow you to deliver some of the experiences that otherwise you might struggle with. And then the fact that can then bubble down into some of the lower layers is just another advantage. No, I'm all for it, and I agree with it. And I think this common language that you're describing
there's not going to be a common language. There's going to be a common language per industry, for example. And so that brings me to, for example, we see this in manufacturing, where there is this fourth layer that I'm describing it as. You're calling it as a resource layer, but we're seeing it for manufacturing. We're seeing it for oil and gas. Let's jump into the Open Connectivity Foundation. Maybe give us a bit of a description and start off with this industry focus, because you mentioned light bulbs, but what's the industry focus, and give us a little bit more high level detail on the OCF.
Sure. Well, it's a nonprofit industry standards organization, and we're delivering that secure interoperability. It was designed to span multiple vertical markets. I think it's fair to say that we're strongest in smart home. If you just look at the membership we have, a lot of those companies are involved in the smart home. But we also have members who are interested in other vertical markets, and we have activities going on in automotive, healthcare, commercial, and enterprise. But we've always had this focus in the core technology and the interaction models, that we weren't designing something that was just for a particular vertical market, because it's pretty easy to come up with use cases that can span vertical markets. So if, for example, just in the smart home, you're very easy to start touching on energy systems and energy delivery with the demand response load control. There's an aspect of automotive where the car is behaving more like a consumer product. It's wanting to talk to other things in your home. It's wanting to talk to your devices. And then there's obviously a lot of crossover between the smart home and smart buildings, technology there, and again, in commercial markets as well. There are other areas where there are definitely strong incumbents who are doing something similar. And we do have several liaisons in place with other organizations that we're trying to work with them. But yeah, I don't think there's going to be just one thing. It's a very fragmented market at the moment. But as I said, we try to deliver as much interoperability as we can in the short term with bridging. We have a big focus on that, but then also provide that path towards some consolidation in the longer term.
And what do you mean by bridging?
Well, we have an open source project as well, which is something I haven't mentioned yet. We have this IoTivity project, which is run by the Linux Foundation, sponsored by, which really means funded by OCF. And within that, we actually have bridges to other protocols. So if you want to go from Zigbee or Z-Wave or Bluetooth or other maybe manufacturer proprietary technologies into OCF, we have not just code that can do that, but we have that a framework, agreed framework about how you do those things, how you map those data models across, and also how you handle any security issues, because you're not just mapping information, you're mapping a security domain. So we've got some generic guidelines for how you do that in general. And then we also have specifics about how you do that for individual technologies.
Okay, so this bridging then, in I guess my vocabulary is you're bridging at the different layers. You're bridging at the radio layer, for example. You were just using an example of maybe using Zigbee, for example. And I am assuming, are you also bridging the different operational technology networking protocols? So if whatever these different esoteric protocols are used. For example, you brought up building automation. There's the home automation, although we can talk about that. Automotive has their own. Are you bridging between those? And then at the application, at the application protocol too, there's different application protocols that are out there.
It's more at that higher layer. So again, if you think about this from an application developer point of view,
right?
Like how do I talk to a Zigbee device, but how do I talk to it using the OCF language? At some point, you've got to translate, but we do that at a pretty high level, and so that's where we're working.
Okay.
At that data level, that resource level.
Okay. Well, we'll dig back into activity in a few moments, but tell me a little bit about the history, because this is the second round that I've done interviews with the different IoT alliances, consortia, foundations. And my first round, I did an interview with the All Scene Alliance, and I did a separate interview with the Open Interconnect Consortium. So give us a little bit of history, what happened there, and kind of how it's gotten to where you are now.
Sure. Well, Open Interconnect Consortium, or OIC, that was the original name for the entity that has now become OCF. Mm-hmm. So OIC was founded in July of 2014. It's the same legal entity now, but we did change the name. Okay. And we actually, the first merger that OIC did was at the end of 2015 when UP&P merged in.
Right.
So that happened before anything with Allscene. And UP&P had been doing quite a lot of work on IoT. I don't think they've been getting an awful lot of traction with that, despite the fact they've been doing a lot of really good work. And they were fairly well aligned with what we were doing and our approaches we were taking. So it seemed to make sense to roll the two together. That's what happened. We had that asset transfer. A lot of the media stuff that people really think of as being UP&P, that still exists, and you can still certify against that. We still run that certification program, but all the IoT work was rolled into the OCF working groups, and in particular, we picked up a really useful tool called OneIota, which we use for data modeling. And that's at oneiota.org, and we can maybe talk about that a little bit later as well. Sure. But the combination was really very strong. And then All Scene Alliance and OIC merged during 2016. That sort of process sort of started in February of that year when Microsoft, Qualcomm, and Electrolux, who were on the board of Allscene, joined, and that's the point where OIC became OCF. And we said very explicitly that we were going to support Allscene devices. We're going to provide a bidirectional bridge into to Allscene. And then at the end of that year, the two organizations just came together. So by the end of 2016, we had just one organization, which was what was OIC, UP&P, and the All Scene Alliance, and that's all now OCF.
Okay, yeah, and that makes sense because I remember in having both those discussions, it just sort of seemed, there just seemed to be a lot of overlap, and it was making it difficult for companies to decide which way to go. So it makes a lot of sense. The consolidation makes a lot of sense. Now, I remember the All Scene Alliance also had something called the All Join. So let's get back into the software, and then you also mentioned the OneIota, but so you described yourself as a standards organization or body. I can't remember which term you used, which is interesting to me. How does that relate then to these different software builds that you have? Maybe give us a little bit of a landscape or a map of what's the software and what are the advantages for the members with respect to the software?
Sure. So within OCF, we say there are three pillars to what we're doing, and we need to have three-pillar alignment before we can say we're done. So the first pillar is the specification. Mm-hmm. Second pillar is the certification. So you certify against the spec. And then the third pillar is the open source implementation. And if anything is going to be mandatory in certification, it has to be in the spec. But you also have to have open source code available. So from the very start, we said that we're doing this to enable developers. And developers don't necessarily want specs, they want code. And the best way to deliver that code is an open source project. Mm-hmm. So we've always had these joint aspects, which we started off together, and we're still keeping that going. So the open source aspect of OCF is IoTivity. This is a project that's run by the Linux Foundation, as I said, sponsored by OCF, which really means we pay for the overhead. And it's code that's available under the Apache 2.0 license, and anybody can go and pick up and use that and contribute back into IoTivity. You don't even need to be an OCF member. So that's the open source aspect. And the other thing which I mentioned, which is OneIota, is the data modeling tool, which is sort of separate again. That's how we just handle the pure data modeling aspects of OCF. Now, All Scene Alliance was built around a technology that was developed initially by Qualcomm called AllJoin.
Right.
So they had the all join technology, and then they open sourced that with the all join project. And initially, that was just an open source project that was sort of run out of Qualcomm, and then they set up the All Scene Alliance to expand the base of companies that were using that and contributing to it, and provide a little bit more of a structure than just an open source project. But it really was focused around open source, and they, although they started doing what I think would be some standards type things in terms of planning new features and things like that, but really they were definitely open source led, whereas in OCF we sort of had the two running in parallel a little bit more. So whenever those two that merged in, the All Scene code rolled into IoTivity as well, and we have that as part of the bridge that still exists to the All Scene ecosystem.
Okay. Yeah. And again, I think it makes sense. We don't want to have too many code bases out there, especially if they're focused on the same customer, the same problem. Can you describe a little bit more the One IOTA? I'm intrigued. You say the data modeling tool. What does that mean?
So what? If you go to that website, you can actually see all of the data models that OCF is using, and it's actually more of a Wikipedia style environment. Anybody can submit a data model. Now, that doesn't mean that OCF is going to approve it. And frankly, if you do want it to be approved, it's probably worth having a conversation with some of the people who are doing that sort of thing, are responsible for approving it, to make sure that you're sort of fitting in with everything else that's going on. But it's all very visible. You can submit this in its combination of JSON and Swagger, is the modeling tools and languages that we use, and that is actually the normative standard that we use for data modeling. So there's two things here. One is it's very fast. We don't need to go through the typical standards process if all you need is just a new data model. And also you can actually, because of the way it's structured with the JSON and the Swagger, you can use that to generate documentation if you need to do that, which sometimes we do if we're pursuing international standardization. They actually do want a paper document, but the paper document is generated from the online tool, not the other way around. Okay. And you can even generate code as well. You can generate code stubs for the data models, which accelerates your software development.
Okay. And so to dig into it a little bit more, then we were saying a data model, to go back to the example, maybe you can give me some other examples, but a light. So are you saying then there is a data model or maybe multiple data models that you could represent a IoT light with? Is that at the level that we're talking about here?
Yeah, there's two levels. One is the resource level. So we have standardized resources. So there would be standardized resources for temperature, color, light intensity, binary switches. So there's sort of a range of standard resources, and then those can be put together into devices. So you structure the device in a very sort of layered manner, and then there are other resources in there which do things like just describe the device, what the platform that it is on, and that in OCF terms, the platform is the physical product, and then you can have a number of logical devices that are on that physical product, which again can be described, and then you actually have the resources themselves, which are tied typically into physical sensors or control points.
Okay, very good. No, and everyone listening, this is super important, and I guess it's only important. I mean, for example, let's use the light. So, what David is saying here, and David, you correct me if I'm wrong, but you're putting together the models that we're talking about are these meta models, at least in my terminology, and they define common parameters. And you were saying intensity, luminosity. I can't remember the other ones that you said, and which is important. So why that's important is if you're going to have your IoT product, it's going to be in isolation and only working with itself, then it doesn't matter. You can be one layer down at the application protocol layer, and you can define whatever you want. What's important, and one of the main drivers for OCF, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you can develop your product within this framework, within this within the OCF framework, so that it can work with other products that are using these same models. And so the way I think about it is it's kind of a layer above the application layer. So if we just go old school layers here, it's a layer above that, and it's kind of like a vocabulary. And if everyone uses the same vocabulary, then you can plug your light in there with a thermostat, with a whatever, and they'll be able to communicate the same way. Is that a good way of describing it, or
that's exactly it? That's exactly right. It's making sure everybody's speaking that same language. I describe it like I can call up somebody in France. That doesn't mean I speak French.
Right.
So we're defining that grammar, and we also talk about the interaction model. So I described how we're structuring descriptions of devices in terms of resources, as well as the actual resources themselves, which could be the light switch, the actual physical binary on-off light switch, and then we also have security attributes, which are also described as resources. And one of the key things in OCF is that the way you interact with every resource is the same. And that interaction model is a RESTful interaction model, which we selected because we know that is a very scalable approach. So you can have a lot of devices talking to a lot of other devices. And because it's RESTful essentially is meaning stateless. Every device doesn't need to keep track of every single interaction that it's in the middle of. You can have thousands of devices talking to thousands of other devices, and you don't need to have huge amounts of memory and other resources that you might otherwise need to.
Yeah. No, I dig it. Now let's look at it from our listeners' perspective, and they're considering joining the OCF. So far, you've said IoTivity and One Iota, they're pretty much open to everybody. So what's the intellectual property, if any? What intellectual property is unique for the members? And I'm going to ask you in a moment, how much it costs and all that and the funding. But what is it that members get if this is all open source anyway? Why don't they just write to the open source and not join at all?
So there's
technically,
sure.
I want to focus on that.
Sure, absolutely. There's I would say 4 benefits that you can get from joining OCF as an organization. So the first one is that you get to certify your devices, which means that you get some level of guarantee that your devices really are interoperable rather than just hoping that they are when you put them out into the market. The second thing is once you get certified, there are the 2 other benefits that come along with that. First is the branding. So if you actually want to say that you are OCF or put that OCF logo on your device, you need to be a member. You don't get to use the OCF brand unless you join and certify. And then the third thing is there's IPR protections from joining OCF. So OCF operates on a basically RAND-Z policy, so that's reasonable and non-discriminatory, zero royalty. There's a sort of asterisk after that, which I can dig into if you wish, but fundamentally it's RAND-Z. And that is different from what you would get if you just pick up and use the Apache 2.0 license. Now, Apache 2.0 it's fine open source license, but the licensing you get from that is based on contributions and use. So it's not as broad as the licensing that you would get via OCF. So there is a difference there between just picking up and using the Apache 2.0 licensed code and joining OCF and being part of that, because basically you're getting coverage from all the 400 plus members who've already joined OCF, which is different from what you would get if you just take the IoTivity code. And then the fourth benefit is that you get to influence the development of direction of OCF. So, well, first of all, I guess you have some visibility just seeing what's going on. And then secondly, if you step up to the gold, platinum, and diamond levels, you actually can contribute and be part of deciding what's being done next.
Okay. No, and those are all valuable. I can totally buy into it. And maybe number 3 is super valuable, and I want to talk about it a little bit more. But certification, yeah. And now, is this a separate to get certification? Is that included in the membership, or is that something that is paid for separately?
That there are listing fees that we have. We also use test labs, so you need to pay a test lab to run those tests, and there is a listing fee. Although the fees we keep those as low as we can. They really are just intended to pay for the resources that OCF puts into developing the certification program and running it.
Okay. And the branding, that makes a lot of sense as well. How many, do you have any stats for us if we were to go to a big box store and go into our IoT section? Are they starting to put OCF logos and so forth? Do products use that right now?
Not yet. We've got I think it's 13 devices certified in OCF. It's been a little bit slower than obviously we would have hoped. I think part of that was due to the merger with Allseen. I mean, it's in the long term, it's a very good thing. In the short term, we had a lot of work to do.
That seems really low. Technology. 13. Yeah. Okay.
But we do have a lot of our member companies are planning things which I can't go into details about yet, but I would just say, so watch this space, particularly around the IFA trade show that's coming up, and also then CES. We'll also be having some other announcements between those two, but those are two big ones to keep your eye out for.
Sorry, what was the first one? I'm not familiar with it.
The IFA. This is a trade show in Berlin. It takes place, I think it's right at the end of August and into September.
Okay. Yeah, we'll put the links in the show analysis notes. Okay, that 13 seems a little low to me, given you guys have been around for a long time. But I can understand there was a bit of digestive issues that you had to work through. But you've got a lot more. I think what you're implying is you have a lot more devices that are in the pipeline that are going to be popping out the other end pretty soon, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, you can see just from the membership that we have, we've got some of the biggest companies, appliance manufacturers and others in the world on board. And one public statement I can point to is Samsung at CES this year in January said that by 2020, all of their smart home devices are going to be OCF certified, and their control applications are going to be able to control all OCF devices, no matter who the manufacturer is. So that's just one data point.
That's a big one. It's a big
data point.
Yeah, I've heard them say that by 2020 all their products are going to be connected, but I have not heard that they're going to have the OCF logo on it. So that's great, actually. So that is a big one. Let's go to number 3, and I don't want to go into the minutiae here, but I think at a high level what we can say is the liability is less if you're to use the open source through OCF rather than through Apaches, right, at a high level because of potential claims on different parts of software and the way it's used. And again, I'm no legal expert, but I know a little bit about the Apache, and what you're saying is that all the members, these 400 members, have they basically agreed not to sue each other? Is that maybe a way of saying it at a high level?
Yeah, the technical way this works is you get a license to essential IP. And essential IP is stuff that's required in order to implement OCF. Now, nobody has to sort of declare exactly which patents those are, but fundamentally, if somebody sues a company, they say, I have a patent which is required in order to implement OCF, and you've infringed it by doing OCF, then by definition, that's essential IPs. But you've already got a license to that if you are a member of OCF, and the person who's suing is also a member of OCF. They basically can't do that. Right. And that's, if you're a member of OCF, that is a sort of mutual thing between all members. So that's for the essential IP. It only covers the what's called the implementing portion of the device. So you can't infringe their IP in other areas of the device, but the bit that does the OCF stuff, that's covered.
Sure.
With Apache 2.0, you're only getting a license from the companies who have contributed code for the bit of the code that they have contributed. So it's more limited.
Okay, but when you put it that way, I'm going, what else do you need a license for other than the code they contributed?
Well, somebody else might have a patent that's relevant to that bit of code. Company A might contribute, but company B might have the patent.
Got it. Okay, so then you're reducing that liability by being a member of the OCF. Then, so Okay, that hereditary, or I'm not sure what the right term is, but I get it. Okay, and the last one is the influence development. Sure, no, and that kind of goes back to my very first question. I think when people are listening right now and they're deciding whether to join, they also have to join. Well, what type? Or they have to decide also what type of, energy am I going to put into this? And if you do want to influence, there's going to be, some amount of time. I'll just throw out a number: 20% of your time. You need to have someone that's at least putting let's say 20% of my time in, and you correct me, David, if I'm wrong, but, into this to actually have influence. And I know, and we're going to talk about the levels. You've already mentioned gold, platinum, and diamond. We'll talk about that in a moment. But from, to actually make a difference, or to actually be able to influence the development, give us, I throw out 20%, but give us what you think is required, because again, everyone's listening here and they're deciding, is this right for me? What should people be budgeting in terms of human resources, or a percentage of a human's resource, to actually be able to influence development if they were to join the OCF?
I think that 20% of one person's time is probably a useful minimum. I would say that doesn't necessarily need to be all the time. So we do have some members, for example, who will monitor, see, so they know what's going on, and then they'll only really weigh in if there's something they really care about is happening, or if they decide that, no, we want this new feature added in and we really want to advocate for it. Right. So it depends a little bit on, again, exactly what you want to do. But typically for most of the working groups that we have, so we have a whole hierarchy of some business focused working groups, like the one that I run is the strategy work group, but we have membership, marketing, communications, tech policy work group. Those are all on the sort of the more business strategy side. And then we have a whole range of technical work groups looking at core technology, security, open source, data modeling. We have a whole separate group that does that. And then we have some projects that are focused more on particular vertical markets like smart home, automotive, commercial and enterprise. And then as well, some of those focus on particular bridging projects, so Zigbee and Z-Wave or Bluetooth, or relationships with other organizations like 1M to M. So there's a whole range of different groups. Now, so depending on what you're interested in, you particularly usually be involved in at least one of those groups, and they have meeting once a week for an hour, maybe more if it's one of the other. Some groups meet for 2 hours a week, and then there's also some email traffic that you would need to stay on top of. That's sort of, so just monitoring it may not be that much of a time commitment, but if you're actually wanting to really participate in the email discussions or contribute documentation, then yeah, it's going to be a bit more time.
And I'm assuming there's physical meetings as well, right?
There are. Again, not everybody attends those, and you can't dial in if you don't want to turn up in person. But we have 3 all-member meetings a year, one in Europe, one in Asia, one in the Americas. And then we also have 3 technical face-to-face meetings per year as well. So that's just the tech guys getting together, working on the specs. And those are, again, in each of those, the 3 geos, once a year.
Okay. All right. So I think you've painted a pretty good picture in terms of the technical advantages of joining, and you've kind of now, foreshadowed a bit on the business side. So what are the business sides or the business advantages of joining the OCF?
Well, there's, apart from the actual being able to produce those products, I would say that the branding, I would guess, would be a business advantage. I mean, being able to participate in that ecosystem. And I think that from a really high level, what we're expecting to see is that you will have a range of control applications. I mentioned Samsung saying that our control app is going to be able to control, any OCF device. So for companies that want to be able to provide just the devices that plug into a larger ecosystem, OCF provides a mechanism for doing that. And just I guess the marketing and branding thing, I think, is going to become more significant as we see some of those bigger guys shipping the products with the OCF logo.
Well, and I would, I'd zoom in on the word ecosystem. From my perspective, that's the big value. Yeah, the branding, of course, but the ecosystem and breaking it down a little bit. One, you can meet people, at Samsung, you can meet people at, the different companies. So there's the human element, but then there's going to be the business side of it as well. Do you have anything to expand on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look at the way that the IoT is, Internet of Things are developing, particularly in smart home, right now, most devices are pretty isolated.
Right.
Most devices you buy are
their own apps, and it drives everyone crazy. Mm-hmm.
Right. They're talking to their own cloud service. They're talking to their own apps. If there is any level of integration, that is done with a cloud-to-cloud API. But that's typically either a completely proprietary agreement between two companies, or it's someone like Amazon with their own proprietary Alexa skills, and they've persuaded people to write Alexa skills that plug into their system. So that ultimately, we don't think will be a very scalable model. This is why the companies have gotten involved in OCF, is saying that, yes, we can go fast. We can ship our product that will work with our application, work with our cloud service. But frankly, that partly limits the sorts of companies that can participate. So just being a company that's good at producing devices isn't good enough. You have to be a company that can also produce a good cloud service, that can also produce a good app, that can supply that globally in lots of different languages. It's a pretty high bar. But if you want a greater degree of interoperability without having to apply resources over and over again, be doing basically the same job, that's where international standards have always played a role. And companies coming together and figuring this stuff out together and building a standard, and in our case also building the code to implement it. So it is truly building an ecosystem which should allow the whole Internet of Things to move faster, because people aren't having to spend a lot of time solving those same basic problems over and over again.
Yeah, no, I definitely buy into it, and I agree. And I think everyone listening, one of the decisions they have to make is, do I want to be an ecosystem provider, meaning you described it as a control app, or do I want to be an ecosystem participant? And in either case, an organization like the OCF, which is providing what I'm calling this meta layer, what you're calling this standardization at the higher level, allows this interoperability. This is important because we need to be able to bring products together to deliver outcomes. And if they're all isolated and they're controlled by their own apps, or maybe, like you said, there's some sort of cloud-to-cloud control mechanism. The other way, you could argue that the Alexis model, a skill model, or basically it's the API model. If everyone writes to their API, that's a separate ecosystem as well. But this makes a lot of sense to me. And for everyone listening, it's kind of like you need to make the decision. Well, if your product's going to be in isolation, okay, maybe you don't have to worry about this. But if you ever can think of your product working maybe with other products that you have, that's one level, and then working with other companies' products, then you're going to have to deal with this issue in one way or another. And David brought up 3 ways that are kind of happening right now, at least in the smart home market. That being writing to a particular major company's APIs. Now there's a lot of risks associated with that. This cloud to cloud, there's technical risks associated with that, and also the integration isn't necessarily at the fidelity that you need, or doing something at a meta layer, which is also my preference. I think that gives the company the most isolation. Although I guess you could write wrappers and maybe do 2 or all 3 of the above. But that makes a lot of sense. Now, technically, good. So we understand ecosystem, things are going to theoretically plug and work.
And I add one thing. When you're, I said, people can very quickly they'll want to run all, do their own implementation first because they just want to get to market fast. Mm-hmm. But they will still have to solve a lot of the problems that the IoTivity code solves. They'll have to write basically their own equivalent of that. Yes. So I would just point people at IoTivity and say, look, even if you don't initially want to do OCF, you should have a look at IoTivity anyway. I mean, there's a lot of things that are there that you would probably have had. If you don't use Itiviti, you're going to have to build them yourself. So you can pick up.
Assuming you want to talk with other products, right?
Well, no. Even if you just want, to have a resource model for how are you going to model your device?
Okay.
Right. How is it going to describe itself to the cloud service that you're also building? So that you could pick up and use Itiviti in a frankly proprietary manner initially, but if you do it, you then have a much easier option of standardizing on OCF down the line. So I think we did that quite consciously. We didn't want to restrict people from using the code. We didn't want to say that, no, you have to be an OCF member, or you have to get your device certified in order to use the Itiviti code. It's a true open source project, and you can even take it. You can do your own fork if you want to. But obviously that might not be OCF certifiable. We always make sure that the Itiviti code is certifiable against the latest spec.
Yep. Okay. No, that makes sense. And for me, I see most of the advantage of this interoperability, but I can see also saying, you may want to look and see how these resources are designed or how other companies have designed them, just to make sure that you're not forgetting anything, give you some ideas. And that's kind of the nice thing about having the Itiviti open source. And
we've also had a lot of security experts poring over that code. So, everyone, even, whether it's proprietary devices or working in standards, are very concerned with IoT security, but we're convinced we've got a very good security model, and we've had a lot of people who really know what they're doing looking at that aspect.
Good. No, very important. Now, on the business side, and specifically on the business model side, you did mention, I think, a group that sounded like it might have overlapped it. Are you discussing, so let's look at this ecosystem now. We've got, in your terminology, as one main, let's say we're using Samsung as the main controller app, and then you've got the different devices that work with that controller app. Is there any work that's being done on how to divide up the spoils, meaning the money that's going to be generated? I don't know if it's sold as a package, not as a package. In the consumer market, it's a little different than in the industrial, commercial, or infrastructure markets. But is there any work being done in terms of business models, interoperability between business models and the companies, and then how to split up revenue and so forth?
That really isn't OCF's remit. Okay. We don't touch that.
So you have the people there, and this is something, at least you have the contacts, right? Mm-hmm. And this is something that if you are going to be putting together a solution, let's say you're doing a solution for a big installment for, you just continuing on with the smart home market example for, a big developer, then at least you would have the members that come together. You would know the people that are going to come together. You bring the technology that works together, and then you would hammer out the business side of the ecosystem outside of the OCF, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah. I mean, if some members came and said, look, we need particular resources available in order to support business models, and we have a member-driven push for that, that is something which might get into the specification, or we need certain, the ability to handle certain certificates. That might be an aspect that we would deal with, but we don't develop the business models in OCF. It's only if those business models might actually impact the underlying technology, and members it's a member-driven organization. So if the members come and say that they want those features, then that might get in.
Okay. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And you might need the features. I think what David's saying is you might need certain features in the code to be able to expose certain data for your business models. Yeah. And
I draw an analogy.
Technical side, you have it.
I draw an analogy with the Wi-Fi Alliance. I mean, they did a lot of technical work on Hotspot 2.0 to support that business model. But the business model was something that was already sort of being developed. And they said, look, this is it's not as easy to use as it might be. And if we had these technical features in the underlying standard, you'd have a much better end user experience. So that was the thinking there.
Okay. All right. So going back to the overarching question, for everyone listening, the ROI of joining. We've talked about the R quite a bit. We've talked a little bit about the I in terms of the human resource investment. Now, what about the capital investment? Can you go through the different stratifications of membership and their costs?
Sure. So the good news is that the basic membership the lowest level, is free. It has no revenue for no monetary investment for that. There are some limitations though. So first of all, is that you can't certify devices. It's designed more almost as a preview membership. And it's also read only. So you can't participate in the email. You can see the emails that other people are exchanging, but you can't actually send emails. And you can see the documentation, but you can't submit it, and you can't join the meetings. So you can see what's going on, but you can't actually participate in influencing that direction that things are going, and you can't certify any devices and therefore benefit from the. But you can say you're a member, but you can't put the OCF logo on any of your devices because they aren't certified. And obviously, the IPR benefit also comes from certification, so that doesn't come either. So to get those things, to be able to participate and to be able to certify devices, you need to step up to the gold level of membership. But that is only $2,000 per year, so it's a pretty low bar. I think most companies should be able to handle that. The next level up is for people who really want to lead efforts. So if you want to chair working groups, and if you want to actually have a voting participation, a lot of decisions in OCF are taken by consensus. We always aim for that. But that's not always possible. So when things do come up to a vote, it's actually the next level up, the platinum level, which participates in voting. And that's scaling. It runs between 5,000 and 50,000, depending on the size of the company. So if a smaller startup, it's going to be 5K. If you're Intel, well, actually, we're at the diamond level, so it's much more than that. But larger companies, I think it's over 10,000 employees or 5,000 employees. It's based on the number of employees that
makes sense.
That 50,000 level, and then the diamond level is the highest. Diamond level gives you a guaranteed board seat. The other board members would need to approve another company to join at that diamond level, and that is $350,000 a year. So that is pretty pricey. It's even fairly high by a lot of other standards organizations' metrics. But the main reason for that is that we also have the open source project. And if you look at the open source side of things, people don't even blink at those sorts of numbers. And it's just, as I have heard it said, open source is free as in speech, not free as in beer. It takes work, it takes money. And so quite a bit of that 350,000, the diamond level, goes towards supporting the open source effort.
Got it. Okay, and that sounds reasonable. The free one is the free one's interesting, but it's good. I think that's a good place to start if you're not sure. Very roughly, what would you break the percentages down in terms of your membership between basic, gold, platinum, and diamond, just percentage wise?
I'd say a majority are at the gold level. We have it's probably around maybe 25% are at the basic level. And they're not contributing nothing because they do sign up for the IPR agreement. So you are getting some benefits from basic members. Diamond level, we have, I think it's 12 members, is it?
Okay, around there.
Those numbers. And then the rest are platinum. So
platinum. Okay. No, so it sounds like as a smaller company, which is a majority of the companies, they can get in for a pretty reasonable level at the platinum. At the platinum, they can, at the gold. And if they want to be voting, if necessary, if they want to chair a group, they go up to platinum. In my view, this is a very good investment, specifically in your wheelhouse, which is not just limited to the smart home, automotive. You can consider that consumer too, and then branching out from there. To me, whether it's the OCF, if it fits in, these different criterion, or if it's another standard, or I should say consortia, alliance, group, standard body, whatever the case is, I think the investment's well worth it. So I'm sold, and I'm.
You're going to join?
Happy. Give it a try. Yeah, maybe I should actually personally give it a try. This has been helpful, David. You've gone through and clarified, and I think it makes a lot of sense, the consolidation that's happened. If people want to find out more information on the Open Connectivity Foundation, what should they do? Where should they go? You've already given us a few pointers, and I'm going to try to get them all in the show analysis notes. But what's the best place? What's the best thing to do?
The main website is openconnectivity.org. You can find all the information on OCF there. You can also follow us on Twitter at opencon.org. So that's open, CONNORG. Mm-hmm. If you want to have a look at the open source project, that's at iotivity.org. So you can get the code there, and there's a lot of sort of introductory documentation about how you would actually go about implementing this in your products. And then we also have that data modeling tool, which is pretty interesting, and that's OneIota.
Is it
ONEIOTA.org.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you, David. I appreciate the information. I think everyone listening appreciates it as well. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. Well, that was episode 112. Another great number. All 2s and a single 7. To get an analysis of this episode, links to anything that was mentioned, plus the all-important transcript, go to show analysis notes. They can all be found at iot-inc.com/podcast, or you can just go to this episode. If you've been enjoying this podcast, subscribe so you get every episode delivered right to your device. And if you've been listening for a while, well, there are 4 ways you can support the podcast. You can share it on your blog, you can share it on social, you can leave a rating or a review on iTunes. This is an important one. Just go to iot-inc.com/iTunes. And lastly, and this is the big one, you can sponsor it directly. Your company can reach the show's listeners with an audio ad that's read on the show. I'm your host, Bruce Sinclair. Thank you for listening. Until next time, may your path to IoT business be a meta one.
You have been listening to the IoT Inc. Business Show.